back to the Exist Better YouTube channel. I'm incredibly sleepy and it's nighttime, but I have a compelling urge to create things. So I thought I would kind of do like a little update on this YouTube channel. I'm gonna probably be doing maybe like one video a month here or one every 2 weeks. I kind of need to like pull back a little bit. Well, I guess I wasn't creating that much anyway here, but I'm going to be putting more of my focus into videos for the school and more like concrete sort of content that is oriented toward helping individuals with their personal development process. So, but I still want to do like big picture stuff here too, because that's like super fun. And I think some of the workshops that I'm going to have are going to be geared toward that sort of big picture stuff as well. I have a link below to the workshop that's coming up on February 15th. It's not going to be live, but you can sign up now or, pretty much anytime. So yeah, anyway, I wanted to do a video on, this is kind of going to be a follow-up to my video on the liberal and conservative shadows revealed. If you didn't watch that, you might want to watch that first if you're interested in kind of like the collective shadows within society and how groups express those shadows. So basically the idea is that the human psyche, like we all have the same potentials, like we all have emotions, we all have experiences, we all have like feelings of limitation. Like the human experience is kind of universal, right? And so therefore, people who have similar beliefs, similar experiences in life, similar personality traits, they tend to gravitate toward one another, right? Obviously, and agree with one another and kind of uphold the same values, and they have the same shadow as well. So that's not really talked about as much. But this is when you hear people talking about like the collective consciousness, they're sort of alluding to this, but I notice people don't really go into detail about that too much. So I wanted to do that here because, over the past year or so, it's gotten more and more obvious that there are these things lurking beneath the surface. And like I said in past videos, politics really isn't about politics. It's actually about trauma, believe it or not. It's not about like making the best laws and policies. And I mean, we would like to think it's about that, but it's really actually about trauma responses and groups of people who have the same shadow kind of banding together and fighting with people who have very different, usually opposite sorts of shadows. So of course I have to give a disclaimer, as always with these videos. I'm going to be making generalizations, not because this stuff applies to everyone, but because there are patterns that are happening and we're going to talk about them, but that doesn't mean that they necessarily apply to everyone in that group. It doesn't mean that they necessarily apply to you. So I'm sure you generally understand that, but I just like to say that because every once in a while someone gets really offended. This is not, honestly, if you're getting really offended, this probably does apply to you, but you get what I'm saying. Like, these are generalizations. It's not everybody. It's just that these patterns are happening and there are definitely tendencies, right? So I have been observing this. So when I was in college, it's like, 5 years ago now, 6 years ago, 7, many years ago, I ended up doing my final paper on the differences between conservatives and liberals, or conservatives and Democrats, whatever you want to call it, Republicans and Democrats. And there was a lot of studies on it. there were some different findings, which maybe I'll post like a quick summary of what some of those studies found. But none of what was in those studies is anything that I'm going to talk about here, because I think based on my own observations, there seem to be other things going on that weirdly, they're just not ever addressed. So I've been coming to notice how the more conservative-minded people I talk to and the more liberal-minded people I talk to, they always, without fail, and I mean without fail, they always make up a whole when you talk to each of them. So if you ask each of them the same question, the one will give one perspective and it's very predictable, and the other side will give the opposite, kind of like equal and opposite perspective that sort of creates a whole picture. So if you stand back and take on the perspectives of both groups, you're basically getting a full picture and perspective of reality. Now, if that sounds hard to believe, or if it sounds wrong, like no, one side is definitely all right and another is all wrong, it's because when you, and this is what we're going to talk about in the workshop with polarization, having one strong belief and hating the opposite belief, and this like extremism, what's happening in that situation is you have a conscious perspective, which you believe is good, right, true, awesome, makes you a good person, whatever. And then you have a shadow, which you are completely unaware of, you're completely disidentified with. So it's like you don't see it in yourself at all. Often people will project those qualities onto other people. When you're in like a faction, when you're in a group and the beliefs are really strong, you see this in like probably in a lot of cults and stuff, there is a lot of awareness around a couple little things, and all of it is legitimate. At least some of it is legitimate. It has true, the seeds are true. But then, for example, like the liberal perspective, everyone should be equal, or we should all be treated equally, right? Obviously, like that sounds like a good plan. We shouldn't be treating people completely differently and like giving some people a ton of power and taking other people's. Obviously, it makes sense that we would be treating everyone as with equal worth. Another example with conservatism is, everyone should work hard and do their best and not expect everything to just be given to them for free. Sounds great, makes sense on a very basic level, but the issue arises. The individual becomes imbalanced with some of these perspectives because they cannot see any of the other side of it. Okay, so I'm going to use those examples in a second. But because they can't see any other way, and when someone presents them with a different or alternative, or especially the opposite perspective of that, there's this inflammatory reaction. There's this triggered reaction. Because when the other perspective is thrown in their face, they clash with their shadow. So they clash with the rejected aspect of self. So this is super symbolic. I think a lot of people truly don't believe in this. Like, they don't believe this is happening. But when you are getting this like vehement rejection of another perspective, it's this simultaneous instant reaction to the part of you that would or could or does embody that other perspective. Okay, So that was confusing. So let me give you an example. So taking this liberal value of everyone should be treated equally. Now we can play devil's advocate with that and say, well, there are situations where treating everyone equally would actually raise a lot of problems and actually be kind of bad in the situation. For example, if we had a bunch of people in a workplace and some of them were, I don't know, single middle-aged men, and some of them were pregnant women who were 8 months pregnant. Now, should equality apply in that situation? Or should we be treating those people in different ways? So literally not treating them as equals because they are literally very different, having different experiences, different needs, etc. So you take this conservative value of everyone works hard, don't expect things to be given to you. That's great, except for the fact that there are situations where it's entirely appropriate and even correct for certain people to be given an advantage or a leg up. So if, there's a bunch of people trying to escape a burning building, someone should probably help out the 5-year-old and give them the right of way and put them at the front of the line, carry them, as opposed to doing this every man for himself sort of thing. These are obvious examples, and probably anyone could see how they make sense, how you would want to go against that positive value depending on the circumstance. But what happens is when you hold so firmly to a belief, you can't see the shadow of it. So going back to that, work hard, don't expect anything to be given to you, belief or value. It's very hard when you're in that, when you're deep in that, to see how it is taken to an extreme. When it's alone, it can be taken to an extreme, and then it goes into shadow. So what does the shadow look like in that example? It's, working really hard and not expecting anything to be given to you in its extreme equals no compassion for other people, no sense of service to others, and also no self-nurturing or self-compassion whatsoever. So when we take certain values and run with them to an extreme, we're inevitably going to bump into the shadow of that value, because there's no one specific value that can take you on to eternity without having to learn the equal and opposite other side of it, right? So this is why the conservative and liberal war goes on and on and on and on and on. It's because absolutely no one is willing to ever bridge that gap and look at the equal opposite other side of things. And so for a lot of people in these groups, it just gets more and more polarized and more extreme, to the point where the values can actually start to invert to where, what was once such a noble, genuine good value and, value to have, it goes so far from itself and loops back around to this crazy shadow, it inverts. Something as innocent as let's treat everyone equal becomes treat me like this or else. Because there was an unwillingness to take on and take in the other perspective. and to see the pitfalls and the downsides of each so as to come to balance. And what does that mean? That means you are moving toward wholeness within your individual psyche. So all of this is leading back to this Jungian idea that when we look at our shadows, this is not like some esoteric idea. It's extremely literal. The more you feel into your triggers, you sit with them, you work on them, you process them on an ongoing basis, you literally start to see things that you never saw before. You see what those other people you hate are seeing, and you can feel and experience that part of you in yourself. So the liberal wakes up to the conservative within themselves, literally. Like, you can feel that part of you and what they're like and how they think and how they feel, and vice versa. The conservative wakes up to the liberal within them and sees how that person thinks, feels, and the justifications for their belief system. And once that process really starts, there is no more polarization, because the individual has come back to wholeness. They have faced their shadow, they have integrated it, and they literally have no reason to ever polarize ever again. It's literally solved. And think about this. You can apply this to any polarization. I like to use conservative, liberal, because it's so obvious and it's so in your face, but you can apply this to all types of extremes. So this integration that everyone's avoiding, and by avoiding it, we're just saying the other side's evil, I'm the good one, they're the bad one. And we continue to hold fast to these couple of values that are just one side of the coin. We don't want to see the other side, because then we would have to meet the part of ourselves that we reject. That's what's being avoided. So it's an internal process in individuals reflecting out. Everyone's expressing it out, forming groups, putting out news stories, having meetings and making decisions, etc., etc. And this is what the collective consciousness actually is. It's people whose shadows are the same, getting together, thinking things, talking about things, making decisions, but never, ever, ever doing the individual integration work to actually understand why any of these problems and conflicts even exist in the first place. So hopefully that made sense. If you want to hear more, feel free to subscribe on YouTube, subscribe to the newsletter at the link below. You can check out the shadow workbook if you want to get started with your own shadow work processes and exercises. And of course, the school is up and running. We've got a few people in there, but there's plenty of room for more. So definitely check that out. We do weekly curriculum. We're going through a whole year's worth of content about self-development, and specifically the psychology of the individual, and how you can use that to return to your the truest version of yourself. So thanks, and I will see you in the next video.